The first time Daniel saw her, he was driving home after a late shift. The city was quiet, the streets empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of flickering streetlights. The overpass loomed ahead, stretching across a dead highway, swallowed by the darkness beyond. That's when he noticed her, a woman, standing at the edge of the overpass, barely illuminated by the dim light above. She wore a tattered white dress, its hem soaked and stained. Her hair hung in thick, wet strands over her face, obscuring her features. She didn't move, didn't seem to breathe, just stood there, facing the road below. Daniel's stomach tightened. Suicide? He slowed his car, pulse quickening. As he squinted, the woman suddenly jerked her head toward him. Not turned, jerked, as if some invisible force had yanked her attention in his direction. His breath hitched. Her eyes were not human. They were black, hollow. Then she grinned, a twisted, impossible smile that stretched too wide, revealing teeth far too long and needle-sharp. Daniel slammed the gas. The car roared forward, tires screeching against the pavement as he passed beneath the overpass. He forced himself not to look up, not to check the rearview mirror. But he could feel her gaze boring into him, like icy needles crawling down his spine. He didn't stop driving until he reached his apartment. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face that grin, those black pits where her eyes should be. The next night, he told himself he was imagining things. A trick of exhaustion, maybe a prank? But when he drove home again, she was there, standing in the same spot, wearing the same tattered white dress, grinning. And this time, she took a step closer. Daniel's hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as his car sped beneath the overpass. He didn't dare look up. He didn't check the rearview mirror. But he knew she was watching. The thought burrowed deep into his skull like a parasite, filling his mind with a gnawing dread. She had moved. The woman had stepped toward him. That meant she saw him. She was aware of him. And worst of all, she wanted him to know it. Daniel barely remembered getting home. He locked the door, checked the windows twice, and collapsed on his couch, his whole body tense and rigid. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, it was full of nightmares, visions of her grinning face, of her standing just outside his apartment door waiting. Waiting. He wasn't going to look for her. That's what he told himself. It wasn't real. It was a trick of exhaustion, a shadow, a mistake. And yet, as he neared the overpass on his way home, his foot eased off the gas. His breath caught in his throat, fingers tightening around the steering wheel as he lifted his eyes, just for a second, toward the overpass. She was there, but this time, she wasn't at the edge. She was closer to the road, much closer. Her bare feet stood on the damp pavement, her stained dress swaying slightly in the night breeze. And her head was already tilted toward him. Her grin was wider now, impossible, too wide for a human mouth. Daniel's stomach turned. Then, as he passed beneath her, her head snapped to follow him. No, not just her head. Her entire body twisted unnaturally, her limbs bending in ways they shouldn't, her spine arching backward like a marionette controlled by invisible hands. Daniel's foot slammed on the gas. The car roared down the street, tires screeching, as he tried to put as much distance between himself and that thing as possible. But the feeling didn't leave. That crawling, suffocating sensation of being watched. He didn't know if she was still on the overpass, or if she had come down. Daniel didn't want to go home that night. He took the long way, cutting through different streets, avoiding the overpass entirely. He wasn't an idiot. If something felt wrong, it probably was. But just as he was starting to feel safe, his headlights caught movement ahead. Something white. A dress. No! His breath hitched. He slammed the brakes. There, standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by his headlights, was her. Closer now. The dress was drenched, clinging to her body as if she had been submerged in water. Her arms hung limply at her sides, fingers twitching. Her head was cocked at an unnatural angle. And her eyes, those black, soulless pits, were locked onto him. And then she took a step forward. Daniel's whole body screamed at him to move, to drive, to get the hell out of there. but his limbs were frozen. Another step. Her feet made no sound against the asphalt. Another step. Her mouth twitched, the corners stretching, stretching, her skin tearing at the edges, revealing raw, bloody gums beneath. The car engine hummed beneath him. The air was thick. His hands trembled. Then, slam! Something pounded against his passenger side window. Daniel whipped his head to the side. She was there. Her face was inches from the glass. Lips peeled back into that grotesque smile. Her eyes locked onto his. Then she screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was a shrill, ear-splitting wail, like 1,000 voices shrieking at once. A sound that burrowed into his skull and made his vision blur. Daniel barely registered himself, throwing the car into reverse. Tires screeching as he spun the wheel, desperate to escape. The headlights flickered wildly as he swerved back onto the road. And in the rearview mirror, she was still standing there, watching, smiling. But now her lips moved. No sound came from her mouth, but Daniel saw it. He read the words she was mouthing over and over again. See you soon? Daniel didn't sleep that night. Not after what happened on the road. Not after seeing her up close. That face, that smile, it wasn't human. He spent the next few hours sitting on his couch. Every light in his apartment switched on. His front door was locked, dead-bolted, and he had checked the windows 3 times to make sure they were shut tight. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, lurking in the dark, waiting for him to let his guard down. By the time the sun rose, he had made a decision. He needed answers. Daniel wasn't a superstitious man, but something about the woman felt old, like a legend, a ghost story passed down through generations. He grabbed his laptop and started searching. Woman in white, overpass, urban legend. Ghost sighting near highway. Disappearing woman on bridge. At first, nothing. Just the usual ghost stories, some posts about the La Llorona myth, but nothing tied to his city. Then he found something. A local news article from 30 years ago. Unidentified woman found dead under city overpass. His blood ran cold. He clicked the link, skimming through the faded text. The article was short, missing a lot of details, but the core of the story was clear. A woman's body had been found beneath the overpass, the same one Daniel had driven under. Her body was badly broken, as if she had fallen from above. No ID. No missing person report that matched her description. No one claimed her. No one buried her. The city forgot her. Another link at the bottom of the article caught his attention. No one claimed her. No one buried her. The city forgot her. Locals report strange sightings at overpass. Daniel clicked. Residents near the overpass have reported seeing a woman in a white dress standing at the edge of the bridge late at night. Some say she disappears when approached, while others claim she can be seen walking along the highway, only to vanish moments later. No official reports have confirmed these accounts. Daniel swallowed hard. It was her. It had to be. But why was she coming after him? Knock, knock, knock. Daniel jumped, heart hammering. He wasn't expecting anyone. He moved cautiously toward the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. Lack of sleep was getting to him. Maybe he imagined it. Knock, knock, knock. This time it came from his bedroom window. Daniel's stomach dropped. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. Slowly, stiffly, he turned his head toward the window. At first, he didn't see anything. The daylight made it hard to tell, the reflection from his room casting a glare across the glass. Then something moved. His breath hitched. A shape, a face, pressed against the glass. Her face, grinning. Her mouth was open now, lips stretched so wide that her skin tore at the corners, revealing torn flesh and dark, wet gums beneath. Her black, hollow eyes locked onto his. Daniel stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the chair behind him. Impossible. His apartment was 3 stories up. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing to stand on. But she was there, her cold, dead hands slowly pressing against the glass, as if she were trying to push her way through. And then, she whispered his name, not out loud. No! The sound was inside his head, curling around his brain like fingernails scraping the inside of his skull. Daniel. He ran. Daniel didn't remember grabbing his keys. He didn't remember running to his car. But suddenly, he was speeding down the road, gripping the steering wheel so hard his fingers ached. He drove without direction, away from his apartment, away from the city, just away. His phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. You can't run. Daniel's pulse spiked. His foot slammed the brakes. His hands were shaking as he stared at the message. His mind scrambled for an explanation. A prank? A wrong number? No. No one else knew. No one else had seen her. Slowly, breath uneven, he tapped the screen, fingers hesitant. Daniel. Who is this? 3 dots appeared. Someone was typing. Then, unknown number. Turn around. The phone slipped from his fingers. A horrible, gut-wrenching feeling crept up his spine. He knew what he would see. He knew. And yet, against every screaming instinct, he turned his head. She was in his back seat. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Her dress was wet, dark stains spreading across the fabric. Her head was tilted, her grin impossibly wide, split at the corners like a grotesque puppet. And her eyes, those black pits of nothingness, were locked onto him. Daniel couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He couldn't breathe. Then, without moving her lips, she spoke. Drive. The voice was inside him, clawing at the edges of his sanity. Daniel's hands moved on their own. The car engine rumbled back to life. And he drove. Somewhere deep inside, Daniel knew he wasn't coming back. Daniel's hands trembled against the steering wheel. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The road stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by the night. His headlights cut through the darkness, but it was futile. No matter how fast he drove, he could feel her presence. The thing in the back seat. He didn't dare look in a mirror again, didn't dare acknowledge her. But he could hear her, the faint, wet sound of something shifting in the darkness. The creak of fabric. The slow, deliberate movements of a thing that shouldn't be there. Then, she spoke. Not out loud, not in a voice carried through the air, but inside his head. Drive. Daniel's hands clenched the wheel, white-knuckled. His foot pressed the gas pedal harder, even though he had no idea where he was going. Somewhere in the depths of his mind, something whispered. This is how it happens. People see her. People try to escape. And then one night, they just vanish. No wrecks, no bodies, just gone. And now it was his turn. The road stretched on, endless and unfamiliar. He had driven these streets for years, but now they felt foreign, as if he had drifted into another world, a place that didn't want him to leave. Then he saw it. Up ahead, the overpass. He was back. His stomach dropped. That was impossible. He had been driving for nearly an hour, speeding in the opposite direction. But the overpass loomed ahead anyway, rising like a tombstone against the night sky. And beneath it, standing on the roadside, waiting, another woman, dressed in white, identical to the one sitting in his back seat. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. A sick realization curdled in his gut. The woman in his car was never alone. His fingers trembled as they gripped the wheel. His mind screamed at him to keep driving, to blow past the second woman, to never look back. But then his body betrayed him. His foot slammed the brakes, not by choice, not by instinct, but because she wanted him to. The car skidded to a stop. The second woman stood motionless in the middle of the road. Her dress was wet, her eyes were pits of black, and her lips moved. At first, no sound came out. Then, get out. Daniel's body was no longer his own. His fingers fumbled for the door handle. His chest burned as he fought against the invisible force pushing him forward. His mind screamed, no, 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 and no. The door swung open. The cold night air swallowed him whole. His legs moved on their own, one foot after the other, stepping onto the road. The woman from the back seat stepped out with him. They were on either side of him now. 2 identical figures, standing too still, their grins stretched too wide, their black eyes boring into him like open graves. Then, together, their lips parted. We've been waiting for you. The wind stopped. The road vanished. The world around them faded into nothingness. And Daniel began to fall. The next morning, Daniel's car was found abandoned under the overpass. The engine was still running. The driver's side door was open. But Daniel was gone. No footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle, just vanished like so many others before him. His apartment remained untouched. His phone, left on the passenger seat, still had the last text displayed on the screen. Unknown number. Welcome home. And the sightings continued. People still see her, standing on the overpass, standing in the road, watching, waiting for the next one. For you.